The Paul Leslie Interviews.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is our pleasure to welcome Todd Rundgren.
Thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure. We're going to be talking about a number of things, including the late blues legend Robert Johnson. Todd Rundgren has released an album, Todd Rundgren's Johnson. So who is Todd Rundgren?
At heart, well, I'm a simple man at heart. I like the simple things, but I guess at heart I'm something of a musical explorer. I'm not really satisfied staying in one niche. It may have a lot to do with my musical upbringing and the people that I admired as an amateur musician. For instance, the Beatles were constantly reinventing themselves, and since that was the music of my youth, I always figured that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to constantly experiment and move on to new things. So that having been said, an album like Todd Rundgren's Johnson or any blues album that I might have done still has a place in my heart because my very first paying gig was as the guitar player in a blues band. So that's probably the only sensible reason why I would have considered covering one of the greats of the genre.
Can you recall the first time you heard the music of Robert Johnson?
If you want to loosely define Robert Johnson's music as any version of a Robert Johnson song, likely Crossroads was one of those songs, but, Crossroads was actually a Cream interpretation, and I had been influenced by a crop of English bands and guitar players before that, all of whom probably were covering some Robert Johnson song at some point or another. So likely it was a cover by the Yardbirds, or it was a song on a John Mayall album or something like that. When I finally got well into the blues, I was listening to a whole variety of artists and probably was not paying too close attention to the writer's credits most of the time.
What is it in specific that you like about the sound of Robert Johnson?
Well, I came to Robert Johnson, as I say, kind of indirectly. I was very much influenced by a crop of English guitar players who themselves were being influenced by Robert Johnson through recordings that found their way to England through the Merchant Marine. Being a maritime nation, a lot of English sailors would find themselves in southern ports of call in the U.S., places like Mobile, Alabama, where they could find some small record store in a black neighborhood and pick up these records that would never appear in a record store in Philadelphia, for instance. And so the direct influence of Robert Johnson, indeed the direct influence of a whole generation of early blues players, that was happening in parts outside of the United States. That wasn't happening to, great swaths of the country because these records just weren't available to us. So when I first heard the first Robert Johnson songs I heard were, as I say, were being done by John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, other blues bands like the Yardbirds or blues-influenced bands that were coming out of England. And it wasn't until after I started paying a little closer attention to the liner notes that I realized that there's this guy, Robert Johnson, who has created a lot of this music.
Our special guest is Todd Rundgren. Do you have a favorite Robert Johnson song?
I can't say that I have a single favorite. Now that I've had a chance to bore down into the music, there are a lot of songs that I probably didn't see the potential in, but that I get a lot of enjoyment out of playing, which I guess in the end is the bottom line. I think that Robert Johnson was a big influence not only because of his own interpretation of the songs that he wrote, but the fact that the songs lend themselves to other interpretations, and that a lot of people have kind of transformed the music into something that isn't stuck in a historical era. It keeps finding new vitality.
Well, since you said it was hard to pick a favorite Robert Johnson song, Could you pick a favorite song from the ones that you recorded on this album?
Oddly enough, one of the simplest songs, Kind-Hearted Woman, is one of the ones I had the most fun doing. Maybe because all of the other songs, or many of the other songs at least, had been so thoroughly covered by other artists that it's hard to find a way to get a new look at them. But this was not necessarily one of the more covered songs. I'm sure it did get covered, but I just got the idea of doing it in a certain way. And it was one of the very last songs that I did on the record. And so I think I felt, I guess, a little unburdened. I had gotten through all of the, the more familiar material and managed to find different ways to approach it. And so by the time I got to that song, I was just kind of having fun, which I think is part of the original intent.
Is that how you approach the album, in a way? Entertainment?
You could say that in a way. It was me sort of reliving my youth, in which the only thing important to me was playing the guitar. When I first got out of high school, I didn't really ever envision that I would be more than a guitar player. And so I was kind of possessed about it, one might say nearly suicidal. And so it was an opportunity for me to go back and do it and have it not be a factor in my rep, I guess. In those days, it was, if guitar playing was all you did, every note you played seemed to have some sort of importance because you were a gunslinger in a way. In a world of other guitar players, you're trying to get some respect. And that's so long ago to me at this particular point that to go back and do a blues record and to visit some of the material that I was familiar with through so many different channels, that it was mostly, just fun to play the guitar, to not try and compete with anyone, to just depend on the technique that remains to me. and in that sense, it was even more fun to play live, to go out and to be able to do so much improvisation on a nightly basis reminded me of the good old days.
Because you were making this album, did you listen to a lot of the different interpretations that have been recorded over the years of Robert Johnson's songs?
Well, I had to. It's kind of the opposite of that. If I was listening to any of the other versions, it was so that I could find a different way to approach the song. A lot of this stuff, as I mentioned, has been well covered. Some of the versions are iconic, like Cream's version of Crossroads Blues. So the challenge is to try and do it in a way that doesn't remind people of somebody else's version. And the idea, I guess, for me was to try and go back to Robert Johnson like I hadn't before, like so many before me had, but I hadn't, and try and hear what the essential melodies are directly from the source and come up with new parts and melodies and things like that and ways of approaching the material as if I had never heard, Cream's version of Crossroads Blues or anyone else's iconic version of a Robert Johnson song.
What studio did you record this album in?
Oh, I didn't do it in a studio. I did it at home. It's the way I make most records now. I find enough space to make noise in, and then it used to be that you had to have, first of all, a properly configured acoustic space, but on top of that, recording equipment didn't used to be as portable as it is nowadays. And so all I need is an audio interface on my laptop, a couple of microphones, and I'm good to go. So I did it here in my house in Kauai.
Do you prefer an environment like that?
The environment I prefer, actually, is one in which I get the maximum amount of solitude when I'm in the middle of the recording process, particularly if I have to write things, or in this particular instance, arrange things kind of from scratch. I do my best work when I'm kind of like undisturbed for a while, and all of those outside interruptions and situations and stuff go away for long enough that you can hear what your brain is actually doing. And so all I require really is the proper amount of solitude. And it used to be that I would go back to my old house in Woodstock and hole up there for a couple of weeks, and that would be enough to get through the process. Now that I've, last couple of years I've had family and stuff like that in the house, so I have to go out and, for instance, find some vacation rental and move into it so that I can get enough peace and quiet for that process to proceed.
What is it that you want the listener to get out of the experience of listening to this album, Todd Rundgren's Johnson?
Well, the bottom line is that the blues has always been has always been meant to be a diversion. The blues is the profane side of the black musical experience. The first thing you have to accept is that this is music principally devised out of a particular culture, and the other side of it is gospel music. The gospel music is the holy, saintly music that you do in church, and the blues is that dirty music that you played the night before. Its proper place, is really, it's not supposed to be that vaunted. It's a consumable item, put it that way. And sometimes I think, tend to take it too seriously, perhaps because of the culture that produced it and all of the hard times and such associated with that. But the music was always meant to unburden, in particular, the player himself, a way of just, a means of self-expression. And there's a whole gamut of stuff that gets expressed in that. I mean, Robert Johnson himself went from the lowest lows to the most goofy, giddy highs in the songs that he wrote. So, I think people have to continue to see it as like, in the simplest possible terms. There's not supposed to go through a whole lot of thought or filtration or analysis or anything like that. It's just extract whatever, feeling you can get out of it, but otherwise don't get too fretful.
What makes a good song a good song?
There's a lot of argument about what good is, so you would have to settle that question first, but I think what makes a successful song in any case is, is something that through that mysterious process gets in your head and continues to play in there even after the sound has gone away. And I've always wondered what exactly that was. I mean, we're working with a very limited number of building blocks. The Western 12-tone scale, and in any particular instance, the melody to a song may have no more than 5 or 6 notes. So, how does that all come together in a way that catches people's ear, but beyond that stays in their head after the sound in their ear has gone? And I think a lot of it, of course, is melodic, but as time has progressed, I've found that the lyrics are an incredibly important part and something that I invest a lot of time in. And there's a whole science to matching melodies and lyrics in a way that really affects people. And to me, if the words aren't good to a song, or if the words somehow don't fit with the music, then it's not successful to me. So, having been a songwriter for all these years, I put a whole lot of, probably commensurately more effort into lyrics than I do into the melodic part.
What is the best thing about being Todd Rundgren?
The best thing about being Todd Rundgren, it's the low expectations. It's that long ago I got out from under that oppressive idea that I had to be successful. I was making money as a producer for other people, and their success was my success. So anytime I went into the studio, I didn't constantly have this sort of Damocles hanging over me that represented success and failure. And so after all these years, I tend to do whatever it is I think I'm supposed to be doing. I pay a whole lot of consideration to the formula or to the things that I've done in the past. Everything is the future to me. So that's the best about it.
What is your all-time favorite meal?
All-time favorite meal. I'll tell you, it's pretty funny, but I don't long for a lot of things. I don't go around yearning for stuff. But for some weird reason, every time I go back to Philadelphia, we stay at the Warwick Hotel, and we go across the street to an all-night diner called Little Pete's, and I have eggs and Scrabble with Caro syrup. And I don't know if it's my ultimate prison meal, but there's just something very comforting about it to me, to go back and have the kind of breakfast that my parents would take us out for on a Sunday morning at Howard Johnson's or something. So I tend to go back for that. And, other meals fade in and out in popularity.
My last question is very open-ended. For anyone listening in, what would you say to the listener?
Well, I want to say hi. I want to say, geez, I hope they at least give the record a listen. Let's see if they think there's anything they'd enjoy on there. And certainly to keep an eye out for when I get out on the road. I may not be playing the blues forever, but we do put on a pretty good show still to this day. So hopefully we'll be coming to your neighborhood soon.
Well, Mr. Rundgren, I appreciate this interview.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me.
Have a good one.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.